Legacy games have, in recent years, become very popular, but it all started with a single game from 2012. What was this game, and how did a single game start an entire phenomenon? What does it tell us about board gaming in the past, present, and future? Stay tuned and I will dig into these questions here on Legendary Tactics. I have to say that, in researching this video, there were quite a few surprises in store for me. The creation of legacy games as a genre has had a very interesting history. For example, you will never guess what game was the direct inspiration for the legacy game genre, and the nature of the conventions that it bent or broke was more extensive than I ever realized. A lot of this information was distilled from a series of talks given at the Game Designers Conference in 2017 by Rob Daviau, the prominent designer, supplemented with Matt Leacock, who worked with Daviau on one of the best examples of the genre, Pandemic Legacy. The concept of a legacy game is an intriguing one that we will examine, but first, for the uninitiated, let's first define what a legacy game is. What makes a game a legacy game? Simply put, it is the introduction of episodic storytelling into a board gaming experience. The consequences of actions taken in one game carry forward to future games, and additional content, whether it be rules, pieces, or other things, is added periodically, kept secret through the use of envelopes and boxes. All of this is ensconced within a narrative that provides a framework for how multiple plays of the game are held together. And at the end, one either has a game that is complete and cannot be played again, like Pandemic Legacy, or is then playable in its unique final state, like Seafall, Charterstone, or Risk Legacy. Rob Daviau is a key figure in the world of legacy games. His design credits include Risk 2210 AD, Betrayal at House on the Hill, and Seafall, among many others. And he also co-designed the first legacy game of all, the game that launched the genre, Risk Legacy. Daviau's idea originally stemmed from the experience of role-playing games, especially Dungeons & Dragons, which took much longer than a single sitting to complete. Often, role-playing campaigns stretched over days, weeks, months, or even years. Characters came and went, the world of the game evolved, and the narrative along with it. The nature of the game necessitated what made Dungeons & Dragons unique, that the story picked up where things left off when each session began, in the same way that comic books, television, and serials do. He also originally got some inspiration when thinking about the game Clue, wondering why the characters kept returning to the same house every time when they know that Mr. Body is going to be killed again, or that Professor Plum had murdered someone the day before. What if Tuesday really followed Monday in that context? Could this experience be duplicated in a board game? Daviau wondered. With the support of a publisher, he began to toy with the idea of reworking Clue into an early legacy format, and even began work on it. It was called The Usual Suspects, but likely due to its complexity, it didn't go anywhere. However, the idea remained. Each of his game designs also eventually played a part in the creation of the genre, and Risk Legacy in particular. In his speech from 2017, Daviau gave a breakdown of how his designs impacted what became Risk Legacy and Pandemic Legacy, arguably the two most important legacy games. For example, designing Risk 2210 AD gave Daviau the sense of how games could be big in scale, even when, or perhaps especially when, working with a pre-existing engine. Another of his designs, Betrayal at House on the Hill, gave him the appealing idea of having a board game actually surprise the players, where the unexpected became a central part of the board gaming experience. And working on Heroscape helped him develop the sense of narrative development and storytelling in games. However, Daviau directly credits Trivial Pursuit Lord of the Rings DVD game as the ultimate inspiration for Risk Legacy. In his effort to make the game accessible to players with different levels of knowledge of Lord of the Rings, he essentially sorted the questions so players begin with the easy questions, in the Shire, and finish with the hard questions, on Mount Doom. The reaction to this otherwise logical act of organization was startling. The fact that these questions were ordered from easy to hard and that there came a moment when the game was completely done caused a real pushback. The reason seemed to be that when a deck is randomly sorted, there is an illogical sense that there is an unlimited number of questions in the deck. If ordered in this way, there was an obvious finite end to the game where every question had been read, and this drove people crazy. What Daviau didn't realize was this was one of the unspoken covenants, as he refers to them, that he was accidentally breaking with the Lord of the Rings trivia game, and then later willfully with the legacy game concept. What were these inviolate cultural norms? They are nothing legal, nothing binding, nothing biblical, as he says, but instead are built-in, unspoken expectations, perhaps even unrecognized by both designers and players, as to how a game design should be. Legacy games, by their very nature, are designed to break the board gaming covenants, or what might at least be considered to be cultural norms, that had been in place since time immemorial. The first of these, which likely no one realized existed, involves the high value players place on the perception of infinite replay, even though players will often never play a given game more than a few times. The first covenant states, "The player shall decide how much a game should be played, with whom, and how often." In legacy games, the story plays out over a finite number of games that is decided by the designer. Even though playing through a legacy campaign is likely to result in more actual plays of a game than it would otherwise, simply because the designer gives many compelling reasons for you to do so, and would even be a better experience overall, it violates this unspoken covenant. This is made worse by the fact that some legacy games can only be played once through, as the game components are permanently altered or destroyed along the way, and also that it usually makes sense to play the game repeatedly with the same group of people to maintain a continuity of narrative. People really want games to be a similar, repeatable experience, potentially with a different configuration of players each time, and either by making different decisions or by reacting to an in-game luck element to slightly alter the experience each time. Like a book, movie, or music album, which is completely the same every time we experience them, board games generally offer a similar, repeatable, and mostly predictable experience every time the box is opened. Legacy games are more experiential by nature, and to be fair, there are experiential formats for the examples just mentioned. Books are typically repeatable experiences, but not in the case of a coloring or crossword book, which is completed after only one use. The script of a movie presented live on stage as a play would have variants each time, just as a music album would if presented live in concert. And in the case of a board game, it would be a legacy board game. In a legacy game, it is the designer who chooses how much the game can be played, typically providing both a minimum and maximum number of games. And this broke the first covenant. What is interesting is the reaction to this. After all, no one writes an angry letter to a publisher because their coloring book is all used up. The issue is that board games are typically part of the former repeatable category, and legacy games are of the latter experiential category, and this caused the initial surprise and discontent among the gaming public. The second covenant involves the nature of games to provide consequence-free exploration. The theme of a game lets players try out different experiences, to put themselves in the shoes of someone else, to face the same decisions, and to see what one might do differently. Legacy games, however, add consequences to the gaming experience. Because stickers are added to the board, cards are modified or ripped up, and new rules and components are added throughout the journey, it's possible, and likely, that a mistake made in Game 2 will negatively affect your play in Game 5. In other words, your choices will affect not only the current game, but every game thereafter. This idea isn't entirely new, as there are many older games with campaigns where your troop of soldiers, say in Ambush, or aircrew like in B-17 Queen of the Skies, or tank crew like in Patton's Best, evolve and grow over time. But one can always reset the clock and rewind to a previous game state. Not so with legacy games. In essence, what this means is that the stakes are raised from normal levels, which makes for a much more interesting experience. After all, even a vaunted game like poker is quite banal without some skin in the game. For Risk Legacy, adding these elements increased tension, provided new challenges, and left players with cliffhanger endings, giving them a reason to play again. As these consequences are played out, the nature of the game constantly changes, which keeps it interesting. But another side effect from this is less obvious: the minimization of mastery. Typically, when playing a new game, players are a bit lost. About halfway through their first game, however, most players begin to get a sense of how everything fits together and how a game can be won. By the third or fourth game, a sense of mastery seeps in, where the disorientation dissipates and players make more skillful and deliberate moves. By repeatedly refreshing the framework through which a game is understood, legacy games take away that sense of mastery. Players are constantly in that initial phase of disorientation, as the game's circumstances change to the point where their old moves just won't work as well as they used to. And it's important to note that it's the players, and not usually the luck of the die, that results in these permanent changes. The third covenant that legacy games break is that the designer controls materials. There's the idea that the game has been completed through the development process, and now the player's job is to enjoy the game that has been created. What legacy games do is provide players with most of a game, where the designer and the players work together to complete the experience. Daviau says it's like the players are unwilling co-designers with limited knowledge at what they're designing. And so the new materials and components are released to the players in stages, so it doesn't become overwhelming and oversaturate the gameplay. The fourth covenant that Daviau outlines is that the back of the box should tell you everything that's inside. It has been a standard for decades that the back of the board game box tells you exactly what all the components are. This, for obvious reasons, wouldn't work well with a legacy game, as most of the fun lies in gradually discovering these as the game progresses. The fifth covenant ties into the fourth, and that is that the game designer isn't lying to you. It's an expectation that the rules and components set up certain expectations as to how things work, and that the designer will explain things fully and clearly to players in advance. Not explaining things fully or explaining rules that change later is not generally anticipated. This is something that Daviau delights in. He will tell you straight up that a legacy game designer will lie to you as to what the game is about and how things will play out. But he says that there is good reason to be that way, and this is because it creates narrative surprise. Narrative surprise leads to drama and refreshes interest in the game, especially as legacy games require multiple plays of the same game to complete the story. So what did Risk Legacy, the first legacy game ever, do exactly, and how did it break these covenants? Ultimately, its standout feature is evolving gameplay. Choices and outcomes in each game permanently change the rules and components going forward. For instance, unlike regular Risk, players pick factions with unique powers, but any unused powers are destroyed forever. Then, as more games are played, players make decisions that alter the game state going forward, such as placing stickers on the board, tearing up cards, or writing on the game components. Also, the rulebook itself evolves with blank spaces for new rules and sealed packages that hold surprises for future games. Early winners get major bonuses, while others make minor changes. Risk Legacy includes a narrative element, with a storyline that unfolds as players play through the campaign. This adds depth and context to the gameplay, making it more immersive. Despite the permanent changes, Risk Legacy maintains replayability through its evolving mechanics and the different paths the game can take. Each group's experience will be unique based on their choices and the outcomes of their games. Despite the permanent changes, Risk Legacy maintains replayability through its evolving mechanics and the different paths the game can take, and remains a playable game at the end of the story. Each group's experience and final components will be unique based on their choices and the outcomes of their games. So what is the future of legacy games? While the impact has been significant, and they have opened some intriguing design possibilities, they are unlikely to become part of mainstream gaming in my opinion. Part of the reason is because the covenants Daviau mentioned among casual gamers are too strong. It's very unlikely that they would play a game often enough to benefit from an ongoing storyline, and it's also unlikely most people would ever accept ripping up cards and defacing their game boards. While regular gamers are open to the experimental nature of legacy games, casual gamers just aren't. There is also a limit to the concept being applied broadly among most games. We are already seeing legacy elements added to games in surprising and unexpected ways, as in the legacy versions of Sagrada and Ticket to Ride. But the reality is that the legacy concept will be hard to implement in most games, and in either case will be difficult to justify the required time and expense in designing them in terms of sales. Producing legacy versions of Pandemic, Risk, and Ticket to Ride, some of the most popular and most recognizable games on the planet, has a better shot at being financially successful than games that only sell well within our close-knit board gaming hobby. Of course, more legacy games will be there down the road, but why make a full legacy game when a simpler campaign game would do? Overall, however, I am overjoyed that the legacy game exists. Hearing about and eventually playing Pandemic Legacy Season 1 was exciting and felt like a breath of fresh air, further evidence of how far our hobby has come since the days of Monopoly, the Game of Life, and yes, the original Risk. It will always be an option for designers going forward, and the hobby is richer for it. This is the legacy of Risk Legacy. And this is Legendary Tactics. Thank you for watching.